that I'm up here. So we just want to say, let's see, I'm sorry, I just got to find my notes here. So the Tribal Water Security Project is a collaboration between the Akiak Native Community and the University of Washington's iSchool. And we're proud to present our webinar series today. This webinar series contributes to the Water Security Project's mission to better understand, examine, and develop solutions to water accessibility, quality, and quantity challenges among Native Americans, Alaskan Natives, and Indigenous peoples within and outside of North America. Because water is central to everything that we do within and outside of our communities, it is so important for us to understand how our communities are addressing some of the priorities that are common across our groups. These priorities vary by region and by tribe, and there's so much to learn from one another. Thus, as a team, we are pleased to create this space where we can share knowledge and information across communities. With that being said, we want to welcome all of you to this space, to this webinar today, and thank you for making the time. We are also extremely grateful to our speaker today. Thank you, Craig, for your willingness to share your knowledge with us today. Damaris will provide an introduction to Craig now.
Thanks, Clarita. So Craig Chythlook is a lifelong subsistence and commercial salmon fisherman based out of his hometown of Dillingham, Alaska. Craig's wife and 2 kids live in Fairbanks, where Craig started attending the University of Alaska Fairbanks in 2017 as a non-traditional student. Craig is currently conducting undergraduate research on the food-water nexus in rural Alaskan communities, focused on how water systems impact our abilities to successfully subsist for traditional foods. Craig has recently accepted a staff position at the International Arctic Research Center at UAF as an Indigenous Liaison for the Food Security Working Group, a network of Indigenous scholars, academics, and advocates collaborating to monitor food security in the Arctic through an Indigenous lens. Craig's talk will focus on his perspectives as an Indigenous resident of Alaska, lifelong connection to clean water and salmon resources, the food-water nexus from the perspectives of his academic research, and his current role as an Indigenous liaison looking to promote ethical and equitable research and monitoring in the Arctic. So welcome to Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Damaris, for the wonderful bio there, and Clarita and Ashley for hosting this event, the Water Security Project. I'm very, very honored and excited to be here and offer a little bit of what I've got going on. So with that, I'll go ahead and start the screen share and get into the talk a little bit. But thank you very much for the introduction, and very excited to be here. Okay, so my talk today is going to be a little bit twofold. As was, like it was noted in the introduction, it is sort of a two-pronged attack. The first bit of topic is looking at some undergraduate research that I did around water services, water and subsistence activities here in Alaska. And the second go around, or the second part of the talk today, will be looking at the food security, soon to be food sovereignty working group, and some of our activities and how we're looking at promoting ethical and equitable engagement for observation and research here in Alaska. So again, just a little thank you for the wonderful introduction. I am from the Bristol Bay region. My folks are Joe and Molly Chithlook. They still live in the Dillingham area, in the Bristol Bay area. I am still looking and finishing up my undergraduate degree, but this first part of the presentation was funded through the BLAST Scholarship Program, the Biomedical Learning and Student Training. It's an NIH build program at the University of Alaska Fairbanks that promotes rural and Indigenous engagement, focus on the One Health model of environment, people, and animals as a nexus that cannot be separated. So it is a very open and equitable framework, in my opinion, and I really enjoyed participating in that scholarship program. in my current role as food security working group liaison. That's kind of all of this has led me to where I am today and talking with all of you wonderful folks. A little bit about this first part of the talk about water services impact on subsistence activities. When we're talking about water services here in the state of Alaska, we have we have three main types. The in-home plumbing is something that I think the majority of us are familiar with. We go to the tap and turn it on, and we have water. That comes at an expense, not only here, but it's definitely magnified out in rural communities because they don't have the economies of scale to build upon. You know, there's not 70,000 or 80,000 or more residents kind of splitting that bill. So it can be really, really expensive. And that's one important aspect to think about when we're talking about water services. Good or in-home plumbing water services, just really, really expensive in rural communities. The second type of service is washaterias. There's going to be I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but there's a centralized location. People can go take showers and do their laundry. Again, that's really expensive. And the third type is a honey bucket or a haul system where there's no real running water and people haul water to their homes. And again, there's no in-home sewage. So folks, we take our honey buckets and carry them someplace else. So water security, as I'm sure you all know, is a very important issue. And it is here as well. There's over 3,000 Alaskans that don't have access to water. It's over 1,700 homes. And that means more than 30 communities do not actually have running water as of the time of this, this report, which I believe is a few years old now. So the other aspect about this research project, the other topic is subsistence. It is really, really important when I was thinking about and talking about subsistence that we define it from an Indigenous perspective. And reason being, when we're looking at, or when researchers or whoever is looking at what is subsistence, there's a lot of information and a lot of it is very conflicting. For example, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game defines subsistence as the harvest and process of wild foods. So it's an action that we're taking when we subsist. The NILCA is in response to the Alaskan Native Claims Settlement Act that allows folks to fish and hunt on federal lands, something that is done only by Native and non-Native residents of rural Alaska. So it's place-based. If you live in Anchorage, if you live in Seattle, you're plumb out of luck. I mean, not quite. But that is the definition in that space. And as we get closer, maybe to the community or tribal level, thinking about the Alaska Federation of Natives, what is subsistence by definition is that place-based people have had provided food and other necessities to Alaska Native peoples for thousands of years. So in my opinion, that is a little bit more in line with how I view subsistence. But the purpose of this this research project was to not put definitions for people, that the participants who I'm very happy participated in this research project took the time to self-define what subsistence means to them, so that we are not defining for them, number one, and then it's not this generic term of what is subsistence activities, but it is a very unique and subjective activity. So one of the main questions that I was thinking about going into is does access to water change our ability to subsist? How we went about doing this is we analyzed and categorized questionnaires. We sent out a questionnaire early on and just kind of just to get interest. It told a little bit about the project, asked if people have participated in subsistence activities, if they have water in their home or not, just to make sure that that there's a fundamental interest or knowledge that yes, people have participated in subsistence and they have running water. So that was kind of the only real definition. Beyond that, stakeholders self-described metrics of what is a successful subsistence activity and what is a successful water system. So I think one issue that I noticed early on is that so many times decision making and definitions are happening outside of the individuals or community's power. So it's really, really important to take a step back, kind of relinquish some of that control and allow participants to define what is success in their own opinion. And this is ultimately what I was trying to do through this project is learn how water services might impact individuals or communities' ability to subsist. Oops. Here's the example of the questionnaire and a quick rundown of the methodologies and some of the hypotheses that we had. So this is a very Western process through the BLAST program, and I'm really happy that I did it. But sorry, I was a little sidetracked. Some of the methods we followed: the Alaska Federation of Native Guidelines for Ethical Research, building trust, equitable engagement, kind of giving up some of that ownership in reviewing answers back with the community, ensuring that when the research project is done, that we give the information back to the community. So along the lines, similar lines is community-based participatory research, which is very, very similar to maybe co-production of knowledge. Again, just kind of the basis and the foundation of the research project was not defining or trying our best not to define anything really outside of just creating the framework about a research interest. So these are some of the hypotheses going in, as you can read. As the price goes up, it leaves less discretionary income availability to participants for subsistence activities. So there's a sprinkling of kind of like this Western theory, and then some of my own perspectives in some of the hypotheses. People may be prioritizing subsistence activities above paying utility bills. Every stakeholder will have their own metric and measures of what is successful, and that there's a lot of time gathering water, and that time takes away from subsistence activities. It was, so this is an undergraduate project. While I was taking classes and being a dad and all of these other things, we had 11 interviews, and it's very preliminary. It's not a super extensive project, but I really, really appreciate it. I was relying a lot of my own background and experience around subsistence lifestyle, and really, really, really enjoyed having the interviews and the conversations. I think the people key findings that we came out of this, just to kind of go through it. All participants have
We'll just give it a moment here. It looks like we might be having some connectivity.
Ability to subsist. We interviewed quite a few elders and quite a few folks who transitioned from the community to a more urban. It was really interesting to see how the transition from no access to having maybe a washateria, and then having in-home running water has changed folks' ability to participate in their subsistence activities. Everybody noted that it's really difficult to live in this dual economic system. You have to pay to play to participate in subsistence activities. You have to have a job. You have to, have the financial backing to live a cultural lifestyle, and that's not captured, or the value of cultural activities like subsisting is not very well captured in a Western framework. So that's one important thing that I'm hoping that's going to come out of this research project. And all participants expressed the importance of sharing, so that self-defining what is the self-definition of a successful subsistence activity, and how successful is water services providing or increasing their ability to share. Everybody, it was pretty unanimous across the board with the few folks that we talked to as the access to water changed, our ability to gather, and ultimately the ability to be successful in their own minds in their subsistence activities, which everybody listed off a lot of their values is time spent with family, passing on traditional knowledge, living on the land, learning place-based knowledge. All of that stuff was talked about by all of the participants, well, most of the participants, but one of the main things that was talked about was the value of sharing. And so in the discussions, just talking about it, it was kind of sort of directly / indirectly asked, as access to water, as you went from not having access to running water to having a washateria to having in-home plumbing, does that change your ability to subsist? And ultimately, does that change your ability to be successful by your own definition in subsistence activities? And ultimately, from folks' opinions, it was yes, the time it takes to gather water is a lot if you don't have in-home plumbing. There were a lot of stories of having to go down to the river or your source of water and haul in buckets. You know, a lot of water to clean fish, to clean moose, to clean berries. Like the processing is a massively labor-intensive activity to begin with, but if you don't have an easy access to running water, it just makes it that much more. And that time and effort was the limiting factor in a lot of people's minds. Number one, you need to be physically able to do that work, or it limits the amount of subsistence that you can do. And yeah, or be able to pay people for their efforts to assist with that subsistence activity, like having a family friend or something like that. It is just a massively labor-intensive activity. So the accessibility and the abundance of water from definitions from the folks that we talked to change their ability to be successful in their subsistence activities, which is, again, we don't have a ton of data, but that was really, really interesting. And I really mostly just appreciated listening to stories. I think that was like the most fun part about it. So there's kind of the conclusions about this first round of topics, but really it was through this project that introduced me to a lot of the folks that got to, that led me to being in the position that I am today. I'm pretty certain it was literally just this project that introduced me to some of the folks that asked me if I wanted to participate as an observer in the food security working group, which eventually led to me participating as one of the liaisons within the group. And that'll be the next little part here. The food security, soon to be food sovereignty working group by paper or by definition is a coordinated effort to monitor food security through an Indigenous lens. Specifically in the Arctic right now, but it is eventually, and it's supposed to be framed as an international group. A little bit of background on the food security working group, food sovereignty working group. We grew out of the Arctic Observing Summit, which is an international event that is spawned out of a recognized need that there needs to be coordinated effort around Indigenous food security and monitoring on an international scale through the Arctic Council and stuff like that. So really, it's just this international group of folks who recognize that there was a need to start talking about food security through an Indigenous lens. Where I think, and I'm really appreciative of being here, is that the group and the network itself is moving beyond the traditional Western methodologies in looking at how we can sort of indigenize or lead this project through a very Indigenous perspective, and how that was written into the original proposal. And how we're moving forward is that we are taking the time to, this word I hear everywhere, is taking a really holistic approach. And how I interpret that through the information that is provided in whatever for the organization of this group, is that we're much like the One Health model. health and well-being is the approach when we talk about food security and observation through the Indigenous communities. It's important that the products and outcomes of this have a direct impact and actionable items towards policy and resource management. So that is really in line with the mission of the water security group, is that there needs to be actionable and decision-making power that transfers over into the Indigenous community. So that is one thing that that we are really hoping to do. And then help coordinate efforts to monitor food securities. So all we're really doing there, in how I see the liaison team, is just casting out wide nets and figuring out how we could support work that's already being done, whether that is through, we have a little bit of funding, or just trying to build capacity for questions or research questions that come from the community. So there's that. And when we are in these Western spaces, this is how we are representing what is Indigenous food security. And this is, we're really being led by our values, and that's how we move forward. And at least from my perspective, my role is community engagement. It's a really laser focus on basically this right here. It's the right to eat nourishing and culturally relevant foods, information to inform and advocate Indigenous priorities in both management and policymaking forums, incorporate human health and well-being into pretty much everything that we're doing. And that we want to try our best to compartmentalize the work that we're doing, that Indigenous knowledge and this perspective is not a linear process. The project that I am currently funded in has a beginning and end, but Indigenous food sovereignty and Indigenous food security does not have a beginning and an end. So that is the message that I think we have been and will continue to be repeating over and over and over again, because it is so abrasive to the funding in the grant cycle of basically everybody that we're working with. It's just to really highlight the perspective the goals and the perspective from the Indigenous community. I am one of 3 liaisons here at the Food Security Working Group. Margaret Rudolph, Victoria Bushman, and myself. Margaret is also based out of Fairbanks here. She's a PhD candidate. She's really focused on a lot of things, but her main focus is on the science and technical focus of things. Victoria is a PhD postdoc based out of Nuuk. She is helping, again, with a lot of things, wears many different hats, but is really focused on international engagement. And I'm very happy to be here. And my focus is the community side of things, is reaching out to organizations and tribes and just seeing how we can support everybody. The research networking activity is the funding source. It's a NSF grant that is housed through the International Arctic Research Center here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. It is a regional focus right now. We are focusing on the Bering Sea area as kind of this case study before trying to generalize that into a Arctic-wide theme. And then we are definitely focused on food security, Indigenous food security. The RNA is research networking activities, funding the liaison team. They're making funding available for the advisory panel folks to come up with the methodologies and topics and overall goals of what comes out of this project to the research side of things. And then they're also coordinating, doing the requirements frameworks, like all of the Western side of things is going through the research network activities. We're a part of the team, so we're helping participate in these international events, putting on workshops and doing a lot of the networking. And ultimately, the purpose of the research networking activities project is to come up with a shared Arctic theme. They call it a shared Arctic variable, but really it's just to come up with a theme from the community that is local and regional, but is also of concern to an international audience. So that is one of the main products that we, from that aspect, that is hoped to come out of this. Some of the benefits for this methodology is that it is Indigenous led, and that because it is kind of this exploratory project and research, that the liaisons and all the amazing folks that are within the network is serving as kind of this boundary spanning or boundary organization focused on equitable and ethical processes. I think we are really, really laser focused on always advocating for a community driven bottom up, trying our best to ensure that the decision making happens through the food security working group or from the community, ideally from the community, or at least through the food security working group. Taking this bottom up approach so that the products and the outcomes from this research, this project, have and is led by Indigenous folks, and the results have some sort of beneficial impact to the Indigenous community. Co-production of knowledge and is one of our major methodologies. We're really just giving up control, allowing for a lot of self-forming and co-producing of methodology, strategies, and outcomes. Equitable and leadership and resource distribution, and equitable and ethical use of Indigenous knowledge methodologies. So I think what we're really just trying to do is advocate and continually speak up for those within the network. And as we expand the network and really start doing some of the meat and potatoes of the project, is when we're engaging with communities, is advocate for the communities and ensure that when folks participate in this space, that we pay them, we honor their time, and then the knowledge that they provide is the focus, that it is not interpreted through a Western lens, but it is represented by an Indigenous, like a community member, or at least somebody from the food security working group that maybe can relate a little bit better than a researcher from someplace else. In regards to the water security project, from my understanding, one of the main focuses is decision-making and policy arenas. And these are some of the topics and issues and concerns that are going on in the network right now. And that is a massive part of our concerns as well, is the lack of ability to impact decision-making bodies in the regulatory and policy-making arenas. A lot of the issues that are being discussed are around climate, sustainability, resilience, resources like halibut, salmon, crab, bycatch, or the catching of prohibited species, caribou, sovereignty, and tribal governance. So it's a very wide range of topics, and we are definitely trying to, the project has been going on for a little bit, but we are starting to formalize and add a little bit more structure so that we can pick a handful of these topics and really, really focus on them and try our best to represent them and provide information back to the research community from an Indigenous perspective on these topics. So I guess that was a lot of stuff, because I'm looking at the timer here and we're at like 25 minutes already. I guess the important takeaways from all of the food security, food sovereignty stuff is that we're an Indigenous-led group, really trying to slow down the pace and ensure that the decision-making happens within the community or by Indigenous folks. We have a lot of support. Our team of researchers are mostly very supportive, and helping coordinate efforts here in Alaska to use it as a case study. And we are very much actively expanding and trying to grow our efforts here locally on a regional scale, but as well as our international partners. But yeah, that's kind of the end of my talk here, and thank you all very, very much. And if some of that or a lot of it was confusing, hopefully we have some time to clarify. So thank you.
Yes, and you're getting a lot of claps right now, Craig, in the chat. I just want to make sure that you can see those emojis. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I just wanted to remind, because we had a couple people join a little bit into the presentation today. There's some links in the chat about where you can find the YouTube for the Tribal Water Security Project and the Akiak Native Communities webinars that we posted earlier on this year. There's also a listserv you can sign up for if you'd like. We're going to move into our talking circle discussion, so we'll be ending the recording here just momentarily. And we just want to go ahead and remind everybody that since this webinar is for Akiak Native community, whether they're in the room or not, we're going to do a progressive stack, which is meaning that if you are an Indigenous speaker or community member or liaison, we'd ask that you could speak first. And how we'd like to do that, I'll go ahead and let Clarita take it away from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And thank you so much, Craig. That was really insightful.